Hello, gonna do a New York recap for second Monday session, of course, and Monday night Asia, and of course Tuesday morning a London session, all New York time. So going into New York, of course, didn't do the session. What we did know is that this daily fair value was holding. Um, Essentially, nothing quite amazing had popped up on our screens yet. We'll overall more bullish. Did see a possibility for some sort of reprice lower. Um, on the 4 hour and the hourly, you were more so bullish. Also bullish at the moment, but what we did know is we did have some 4 hour fair value gap here. 4 hour fair value gap, and price kind of was generating for majority of London. Majority of Asia generated all these highs here of sell side. And there is any possibility of a move higher, especially after price just really expanded near the back half of London, going into the open for New York around 8:30 a.m. So going into open, what we had was a very strong expansion higher, very strong expansion. At this point here, probably wouldn't have been short or bearish, but I wouldn't have had that bearish bias at the moment, but you had a really nice short here to go back to at least one of these lows here. You had a lot of these relative equal lows down here, smooth. Price really never took them all, so there was some sort of probability that price wanted to go lower in this case. And what you did get on the 1 minute, you got a 1 minute inverse fair value gap followed through by a strong bearish price action. And what we did do is we did take a lot of these lows that were sitting down here, and what I probably would have tried to look for was some sort of bullish setup to go back up with this trend. In this case here, you had a 1 minute inverse fair value gap set up around the 10 a.m. macro. This resulted in a bullish entry, and eventually price did slowly expand to the upside, taking at least the equilibrium of this original range here, and then not quite sure how much later, but it did go higher. Mostly chopped though. Took a while for this move here to take sell side. But eventually price did take that move. So New York, quite swingy, took some sort of key sell side, followed by a 1 minute inverse fair value gap setup, essentially for a bearish setup to take some of these lows, and then essentially the bullish setup worked. During the 10 a.m. macro, price initially took the equilibrium of the range before confirming for 1 minute inverse fair value gap, eventually taking sell side later in the session. Going into Asia, we had essentially price is still bullish, more so bullish. This 1 hour, 1 day daily fair value gap held quite strong. Had a really strong expansion for the session. You inverse through this initial 4 hour bearish fair value gap, and let's be a bit more accurate here. Initial there, and plus you had hourly fair value gap. It's like, again, you're more bullish overall, but it kind of made sense considering you're in 4 hour fair value gap. It made sense for some sort of reprice lower. I think the bias as well for this, which I saw a good hour into the session, was that these relative, if the session opens, what you had these relative to equal lows down here, these very smooth lows, these two here that were almost equal. They look like a clear draw in this case. So I essentially was more so bearish at market open in 4-hour fair value for price to at least take these two, possibly along inside this area, but initially I was bearish looking for some sort of setup short. Don't believe the session gave me a short entry though for this one. Quite a choppy sense of price action on the 1 minute. Then what happened was eventually what you had is you had quite a strong, very manipulative dump here. This here just looked very, essentially you had a bit of a short setup here with this macro. This macro here. But the move was followed by some sort of strong dump manipulation move up and down. So it kind of made me a bit cautious of what price action was doing. Eventually what you did get is you did get this reprice down. Price took some sort of high from the previous hourly candle. And price eventually did trade down. It was much later in the session which it did it. But again, manipulation, 1 minute inverse fair value gap. You had a draw, you had a kind of a bearish bias lower. It wasn't as clean as this initial earlier one, these relative equal lows here. But price did eventually see lower for the day, or for Asia session. So yeah, that was Asia. Asia was more bearish, had this really weird manipulative candle come into it, where price eventually did take that low. So going into London finally now. Going into London, yes, PA had taken these lows, but what you did have is you had this bearish hourly fair value gap. You had the macro, which took some sort of highs, these relative to equal highs that were kind of sitting up here, or these kind of generated highs that came around here. And what you had was you had price expanded higher. You had these kind of lows here, relative to equal lows almost. Pretty much sitting here as a clean draw for Asia lows. I was essentially for London quite bearish. Way more bearish here. Essentially, kind of you had this manipulation move here. Price did not give it initially. Kind of chopped a bit. Initially confirmed where around here, a bit into the 3 a.m. candle. It would have eventually stopped you out by taking high, but what we did have was that price eventually did take our draw on liquidity here for a London session. Asia lows was quite a simple draw, and we eventually did take it. After this, when I saw this happen during London, I was kind of done for the session. That was my draw. I didn't really care that much what was going to happen after. What I do believe you did have is that price did later expand higher. Kind of consolidated here. Bit after the 4 a.m. macro, you took a high, and price did have a slight expansion higher towards these highs. But yeah, very simple kind of drawn liquidity for Asia. You had these relative equal lows when price was already bearish. You came into hourly fair value gap. You formed this kind of 3 a.m. kind of manipulation move. No real good PD array confirmations here. Maybe there was assisted entry you could have taken, or you just have to wait for fair value gap retest before essentially price takes those lows. But clean draw, very clean draw, and price kind of just consolidated a bit. Failed to go lower once it took the main draw liquidity for London. Nice.